Hello there and welcome Virtual Space Hero community to our this week's LinkedIn Live. And thanks a lot for all the questions that we also got beforehand. The common reaction on the invitation to our LinkedIn Live is, oh my God, I cannot make it, but I really would love to be there and ask a question. And so thanks a lot to those of you who reached out and left me your questions, because I'm definitely going to make sure that we get an answer from our today's expert. Also, a quick reminder, if you are on our email list, you'll always get an invitation also to check out the different platforms that we are using. We are streaming on LinkedIn here, we are streaming to Facebook and YouTube, and the same link where the live event is happening is also the link where you can watch the recording. So definitely check it out. And if you're not subscribed yet to our newsletter, go to our webpage, virtualspacehero.com, and get your newsletter subscription today. Well, we are picking up on a super interesting and emotional topic today. Why? Because we're talking about emotions in learning. And I'm intrigued because also last week in our conversation with Matthew Richter from the Tiagi Group about leadership trainings, it came up several times in different contexts. And we do know also if you're a participant in a learning event, you do feel how the emotion from other participants even can sort of swap over to other participants, right? To the whole group. And it's not only about how emotions are contagious, but also research shows us that emotions have a lot to do with learning. And I'm more than happy that one of the leading experience design strategists again found time in his calendar to join me on the Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn live stage. And with this, I'm opening the backstage, the curtain for our expert, Clark Quinn. Hi, Clark.
Hey, Barbara. Nice to talk to you again.
Thanks so much, Clark, for making time in your calendar. I just became aware that you took over a new role. So I know that you have been in L&D and experience designing for many years, publishing book, but now you became also the advisor in a new role, right?
Right. So in addition to Quinnovation, which continues, and being a co-director of the Learning Development Accelerator with Matt Richter, who you talked to last week, I'm now also serving as Chief Learning Strategist for Upside Learning, helping them bring evidence-based learning science practices to the design of learning internally and with their clients.
Wow, that sounds really intriguing. And for those of you who don't know, the LD Accelerator, Learning and Development Accelerator, Clark Quinn and Matthew Richter from the Tiagi Group are co-founders. Definitely check out their webpage and follow them on LinkedIn. Always really interesting blog articles, posts that they are sharing, but also conferences and virtual events that are being produced and organized. What is coming up at the LD Accelerator, Clark?
Well, we're running a debate series where, for instance, last month, I debated Paul Kirshner about constructivism. Is there a role for constructivism? Not. We have monthly debates going forward. Ruth Clark and Will Thalheimer are going to be this month's debaters. In addition, we're running a mini conference on performance consulting, going beyond just taking orders for design, but how do we do the analysis up? And then how do we find other solutions besides courses when they make sense? Can we develop them and deliver them? Planning a conference early in the summer on informal learning, on how is there a role for L&D in it? And if so, what and how? These are all topics that we're working on, trying to help use as opportunities. The debates are to unpack the thinking behind and get us into the nuances that characterize what good evidence-based learning design means.
So there's a lot going on apparently in LD Accelerator. So definitely stay tuned. Also, LD Accelerator on LinkedIn, and follow Clark as well on LinkedIn. But let's jump directly into discussion, Clark. We talked about emotions before, also backstage when preparing for today. And well, you are my myths and misconception hero in the L&D world. So maybe we want to start about myths and misconceptions about emotions and learning. What do you have for us?
Well, there's a couple, two extreme views, both of which are sort of misconstrued. One is, oh, learning can't be fun. It must be serious. If we're having fun, that's undermining the validity of our learning. The flip side is, oh, learning should be fun as long as people are having fun. It's play, it's learning. We should be throwing around rubber chickens and it doesn't matter what the outcomes are. Both of those are mistaken. There was a concept proposed by a guy named Seymour Papert who talked about it, hard fun. And that's exactly right. If you look at Csikszentmihalyi's stuff on the experience of flow, you find things that are too easy or boring and things that are too difficult or frustrating. And in between is where he talked about the zone. Well, interestingly, a guy named Lev Vygotsky, Russian psychologist, talked about the zone of proximal development. And he said things that are too easy, no learning happens, the stuff you can do with one hand tied behind your back. The things that are too hard that you can't succeed at, no matter how much help you get, are frustrating and no learning happens. And in between is where learning happens, where you can do things with a little bit of support. And those two ideas align perfectly and suggest that learning happens when it's the right level of challenge. What Bjork calls deliberate practice, and no, I think he calls it desirable difficulty, and Anders Ericsson called it deliberate practice, but it's the right thing for the right person at the right time. And that creates challenge. So it shouldn't be ridiculously hard and serious. Humor helps. We have evidence of that. It shouldn't be totally trivial fun without any meaningful challenge. In between that, where the sweet spot, that's what research suggests leads to the best learning outcomes. And understanding that and building that into your learning designs are really important.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you here a very practical question. So for those of us who have not yet done so many learning designs or designed so many learning experiences, how do we know on the fly, like Tiago is always saying, build the plane on the flight, how do we know and how do we see and understand on the flight whether the challenge level and the emotions with that connected that we are producing is right enough, is high enough, or too low? So how do you figure that out? Is it just asking directly the participants, or do you have any other suggestions of methods or tactics that we could use in a training?
Ideally, you're not doing it on the fly. You're testing things beforehand. You run little pilots with a few people and get a feeling for it. And then you monitor your audience as you go along. Doing things on the fly without any practice isn't a good idea. But if you do, so if you're starting with no experience, make sure you prototype it and run it with some people and test it. And then, because people are complex, our brain is arguably the most complex thing in the known universe. Thinking you're going to be able to use simple heuristics and get by is difficult. But when you're doing the right thing in the learning experience, when you develop the experience, you can start being able to read the room and look for the clues. But if people are engaged in using the chat is one way to tell. Another way is, if you're in a virtual space and you can see people's attention if they're engaged, but we also should be putting in regular activities that we're asking the learners, saying, by the way, I'd like to take a poll, or here's a question, please answer in the chat, or I'm going to break you up into groups and give you a challenge and ask for it. So I suggest it's emotion by design, not emotion in the moment.
That's a very good point, Clark, and I totally agree with you. But for example, think about considering that groups are different. Sometimes we need to change in the moment, right?
Oh, sure. If we're in a group and we're working and we detect people seeming to be tuned out or not contributing, we might try and find ways to draw them out. We might check and see. You can always pause and go, is this working for you? In fact, I try and regularly in my webinars and virtual workshops stop and say, is this making sense to you? Please, let's stop. Here's a point for questions. I put a question mark slide regularly throughout the deck and just pause and say, here's the chance for any questions. Let's make sure we're on the same page. If people ask questions, we can go back and elaborate, because, when you develop any expertise in an area, you become kind of blind to the things that you used to struggle with. And now it's easy for you. And you need to do a check and go back and say, what isn't making sense? What should you do things? So not just trying to be sensitive to what's happening, but actively checking where you're at and how things are going is a useful approach to design. And because there are both positive and negative emotions. So one of the things you want to get people motivated, I argue you need a hook up front to get I think you have to open up emotionally even before you open up cognitively. And we know that opening up people cognitively in terms of activating relevant prior knowledge is really useful. But I think you first have to get them to commit. But once you've got that commitment, you need the right level of challenge to maintain that commitment, but you've got to remove the negative possibilities. So learning can make people anxious. And if that anxiety is too high, they don't learn as well. So it's really important that we make it safe to make mistakes. We make it safe to ask dumb questions. One of the things I do is admit my own mistakes and show, I can be extremely dumb at times. And that's being transparent about that makes it okay for other people to similarly go, okay, I'm struggling here. Can you explain that and unpack that? I'm not above. I don't think I've actively had to do this, but I think it's not a bad idea occasionally to seed somebody to be a questioner, to show how it makes it safe, that it's okay to ask questions.
I think those are really very nice aspects that you're mentioning about how the psychologically safe environment is important in learning as well. And it just reminds me, we had a conversation about this morning with Melanie Martinelli from the Learning Gym, because positive emotions or positive feelings in learning are so important. And then we just discussed also connecting it to challenging or critical questions, because we discussed on how important debrief or reflection is in learning, but also how little value a facilitator gives by always saying amazing, great, fantastic, nice work, because then it might be a positive environment still, but anyways the challenging part is totally missing, and the reflective or critical questions that also inspire learning or inspire different ways of thinking is missing.
I totally agree. We're getting off into the learning science of feedback, which is great. Learning science is one of the things I've written books about as well. But that's absolutely right. Meaningless feedback that isn't specific to what they did and doesn't refer to the conceptual model behind it undermines the value of that feedback. It really helps to be specific. You were right because you did X, Y, and Z, then that's what the model prescribes. Or you were wrong. You brought in this wrong model. We don't tend to make random mistakes. We have some randomness in our architecture, in our cognitive architecture. That was evolutionarily adaptive, because then we would occasionally do things differently. If it happened to be better, we could learn that. But most of the time, the mistakes we make are patterned, and they're based upon misconceptions. And we should have alternatives to make those mistakes in the learning experience and get them remediated. And just getting good or bad as feedback, and this includes asynchronous learning, face-to-face learning, or virtual learning, doesn't help us. We really need to have what we did evaluated. And in terms of what we specifically chose to respond, how that relates to what we're trying to learn. And even with groups, you want to take apart their response and point out what was right and what could use improvement, as opposed to just going, oh, that's a great submission. That doesn't tell them anything. That totally removes the value of the activity. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And this reminds me really about how important it is that we as facilitators are also prepared to discuss in depth each topic with the group, of course, in order to create the learning. And coming back to a little bit the first question. So we were talking about myths and misconceptions when it comes to emotions in learning. What do you think, or what would you say are the most important findings on the impact of emotions in learning? Just like the three most important ones that you always have in mind when you design learning experiences.
Well, the first one I would say is that you should have the practice task set in a context that learners recognize is relevant to them. So you shouldn't give them arbitrary, abstract problems. When we give our kids in schools abstract math problems, it just says subtract this, do this, that doesn't really transfer well to when they face math problems in the real world. And this is the research of David Jonasson. So, and others, in terms of the relevance of contextualization, John Bransford and his group when he was at Vanderbilt University and such. So really make a task that is emotionally, not just cognitively, but also emotionally relevant to them. That's more motivating. Adjusting the right level of challenge is the second one I'd suggest, is making sure, and that's kind of where I started, right? That have it at the right task for them at that point. It's not too simple for them at this level. It's not too difficult for them at this level. So you're ensuring that the challenge is right. And the last thing you mentioned, psychological safety, make sure that it's okay to get it wrong. There are times when we need people to perform under pressure, but let them master the skills without pressure first, and then gradually add the pressure in. Don't immediately have them perform under pressure if they don't have the confidence, or if you're at risk of having them lose confidence. There are times when people are perfectly confident and willing to charge in. Sometimes you even have to slap them down because they think they know the answer already. I argue that hook has to really have three components. You really want the learner to have three sort of emotional reactions to be ready for learning. The first one is, I do need this. And you need to help them emotionally recognize that it's of relevance to them. But the second thing is that they have to say, and I don't already know. I've used an example in my first book and my most recent book where people were so overconfident that they weren't willing to learn. And in fact, we had to create an experience up front where they could go through, and if they didn't do the right things, and they wouldn't because they acted in their natural way, they would fail. And suddenly they were ready. And that actually worked to drive them to the learning. There's a third thing, by the way, that's really important and I think is under expressed. And this experience will change that. So I do need this. I don't know it, but I also have to trust that this experience will actually have an impact on that. And that's up to us. And in many cases, I suspect that we've undermined that. We've done trivial things and we're raising awareness, and that doesn't change any organization's ability to do things differently. So we really have to ensure that our designs are focused on achieving the change that they now know they need. You've awakened this recognition that they need this. You need to be able to deliver, and they have to trust that. We may have some backfilling to do to make that true.
And I think those are very, very important aspects, particularly I think what we often not really consider in our designs is how do we deal with different levels. I think it was your first or your second point where you mentioned that, because sometimes we do face trainees or participants with different knowledge level. And I find it here particularly, so my challenge, and this is now my question for you, would be, how do I deal with those different levels? So in one of my past programs, I had the possibility where we sent out a survey and we could ask for previous experience. So we knew the more senior, middle level of knowledge and the more junior people, and we could intentionally group them up depending on the objective of the exercise, etc. But I think in trainings, I usually have a plan B for those who are more advanced, and if I only find out during the training. But how do I find out if I don't read necessarily, am able to read the faces, how do I find out about those who feel overwhelmed, those who are the more junior ones, and they might be trying to hide the feeling of overwhelm? You know what I mean?
I do, and I don't have an easy solution for that. It really helps to know up front which ones are junior. And, as you said, I love it when you can have that knowledge and then you can stage the experience. So it starts here. And I should probably do it this way for the screen. I'm not sure if I'm saying backwards or forwards, but you start here and then you have this stuff that's basic, and then you have this stuff that's more advanced, and people can jump in depending on where they are on their level, or you have it staged. So one time I ran a workshop for a university in Utah, and the first section was also for the managers and the supervisors, because I gave the overview of why this was important, what the underlying principles was, and then they could leave and the designer stayed with the details. This was about feedback, actually. But and second thing you can do is in groups, try and pair them, say who thinks they're, who's new and who's advanced. Let's break the groups up. So we're pairing new people with younger people and then giving them group assignments so they can be listening to the more expert people in their groups and learning from them in the process. One of the powerful aspects of breaking people into groups and giving them small tasks is for anything that's has some opportunity for ambiguity or misinterpretation, that negotiated shared understanding is richer than anyone will bring out of their own. So taking advantage of that deliberately by matching them. But again, then you still have to know them. If you're the other thing I already suggested is pausing and saying, are there any questions? If they're overwhelmed and they're not asking, there's not a lot you can do. But if you can, you might use anonymous polls. I'm riffing now instead of speaking from experienced principle, but polls that check and see where the understanding is. And if they're anonymous, then you can suddenly see that, well, a significant proportion of you have indicated that this still isn't clear. Let's go back and go over it a little bit more. Is a way to make it safe for them to indicate that they're not learning it. And there's a benefit to revisit it for those, those of you who are expert, help me out here or something. So they're not bored, but you have a way to address those poor people. So,
from a technical perspective, what is nice to be used, and I think I did that, but I don't know, last year, someone that because you were mentioning the polls, and in Zoom, if you create a poll, for example, based on experience or whatever, or self-evaluation, what they have on the topic in experience level, then you can create out of poll results, for example, the breakout rooms. So if you want intentionally to put the more junior together, the more senior together, you could be using that function, which is also nice to still create a more difficult task in the room and a less challenging, not overwhelming task for those in the more junior room or less experienced room.
If you can let people choose which room to go to, that's a great opportunity. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Cool. So, Clark, when we as learning designers want to use or to design with emotion strategically, what would you recommend us to definitely look at? You also mentioned already the emotional hook. Is it something in particular, or is it something in general that you would always use throughout any learning design?
That is something I would use in any learning design. It might be in the introduction if you haven't done it in the invitation to the learning experience, but you really want people to viscerally understand why this is important. And I frequently like to use the consequences of either having the knowledge in a positive way or the consequences of not having the knowledge in a negative way. And you can do that dramatically or humorously. I admit that my tendency is to humorously make fun of not having the knowledge, sort of a black humor type of thing, but that's my predilection. But that very much depends on the audience. If certain audiences, I'd be much more inclined to promote the positive benefits of having the knowledge, perhaps in a dramatic way, because they care already. And you're just helping them recognize that this does have outcomes that they care enough about. But so it's sort of a quadrant model. Once you have them hooked, however, you have to deliver. So talking about the strategy is have a hook that gets them viscerally contributing. And then you maintain that level, and that involves keeping the challenge increasing as their ability increases. Back to that word challenge again. Keeping the anxiety under control and building their confidence. That's sort of the third. And I have to be careful because I use the term emotion, and people point out motivation, anxiety, and confidence aren't necessarily emotions in the traditional sense. True. Emotion is a shorthand. The technical term we use is actually conation. In cognitive science, we talk about the conative, which, yeah, I know. But it's your intent to learn. It's your intention to commit, to engage. And that's, combination of motivation and anxiety interact to, if your motivation's high and your anxiety is low, you'll be really ready to go into it. And what you want to do is address it. I just don't think we're consciously aware of that and deliberate in our attempts to build that into our learning experiences, which is why I coupled. So I wrote a book on learning science for instructional designers that ATD asked for after the MISS book. And I wanted to couple that with my latest book, Make It Meaningful, which is about that emotional side as well, because I argue that good learning experience design is the elegant integration of learning science with the emotional components, actually the conative components. But emotional is a shorthand most people get as the flip side to the brain. We have the heart and the mind. We've engaged the mind, but we're ignoring the heart part of the picture. And that's what I think we need to bring into focus and ensure that we understand practical techniques to do that as well.
A quick note here to our viewers. So if you want to read more of Clark, first of all, Clark, I think you probably have your books somewhere nearby you, right?
Right. So you've talked to me before, I think, about the misconceptions and superstitions. It's called Millennials, Goldfish, and Other Training Misconceptions. ATD then asked me to write this learning science for instructional designers, which was going into the learning science, which we don't pay enough attention to, but there are good books about it. There weren't enough books on the emotional side, so my most recent one is called Make It Meaningful, Taking Learning Design from Instructional to Transformational. And that was sort of, these two are supposed to be a sort of companion pieces that together write the picture about what learning experience design can and should be.
And if you want to read more, follow Clark on LinkedIn or head over to his LearnLads, blog.learnlads.com, where you can read more inspiring articles about L&D, experience design, and learning strategy in general. Clark, you were mentioning a few things about creating emotions also beforehand. And I find that intriguing to think about how can we create already interest and excitement, motivation for a topic before the training with whatever surveys, a quick pre-activity, stuff like that, or sending a package, what is also became very common after with all the virtual training now, right? So that learners receive something physically before the training starts with a pre-activity or whatsoever. We said during the training, there are also many possibilities on how you create that environment. And I just want to pick up here a comment Liz is mentioning, that the role of the facilitator in debriefing is essential. And she's mentioning practice is focused on what they need to do back at the job role, relevant and focused on the performance outcome. Exactly, listen, I think probably Clark, maybe you have a few thoughts on that, how emotions connect to the performance, to how we integrate the learned, the practice into our daily life.
Well, we do this. We try and interest our kids. I think can invite people beforehand. Even the session description that people read should make it interesting. You do this when you write the announcements for your latest coming thing. You try and make it intriguing. Why should we care? What is this going to give us that we should walk away with useful? We should also close the emotional experience as well, by the way. We've opened it at the beginning. At the end, we should close it. People shouldn't need motivation anymore because they now should have confidence that they can actually, we want them to get to a level of confidence that they're willing to try it after the learning experience. So we want to package all this up And we do, the way we make it relevant, the way we help people maintain their commitment is every little practice activity we have them do is connected to real work, as Liz is pointing out, that's focused. And afterwards, absolutely, we should be helping people reflect and strengthening that connection to their performance. We should be asking them, afterwards, we shouldn't think of an event-based model. Afterwards, we should be asking, how is that going? Are you applying that? Reactivate it, keep it going. There's a lot of learning science that goes under this that we really can and should be applying before, during, and after any learning interventions to help them stick best, to maintain their commitment and confidence, to develop their understanding. And but one of the things I think we also don't do well is the closing. We don't introduce them to the community of practitioners that they've now joined by having completed this learning experience. So, by the way, this is all predicated on the fact that this is about equipping them with new abilities. But now they're a member of a community that has abilities. We should make that connection. We should also, or at least acknowledge it and give them information about if you want to go deeper here, if you want to go further here. And by the way, you're now prepared to move on to this, which addresses cognitively, but also emotionally, and acknowledge their accomplishment. That's the one thing I want to finish with on this diatribe, at least, is acknowledge what they've accomplished and the effort they put in. Give them that closure that says, wow, you've put in effort and you're now demonstrated capability with this. Good on you. Please go forth and practice, be encouraging and positive, which helps, by the way.
Absolutely. Clark, this was exactly one thing, and this will be my last question, the closure or what we can do after the training. And I think what you were create that feeling of accomplishment is a super nice thought, that sometimes, because we are always too late in our trainings, right? Or at least 80% of the trainers I know, we're always struggling with time. Very often we rush through the last bit of our trainings, the last 15 minutes. We often finish overtime, which also doesn't make it better because it's a rushed feeling, not enough time at the end. And I'm just thinking about one closing that I really love to do is, if I have enough time, right? It is showing the participants the Miro board when I opened it, so the empty one, and then the full Miro board with all the post-its. It's like previously when I still was doing more on-site training, when you have all the flip charts around you, pinned around the walls, right? So it's full of knowledge, activities, and stuff that you produced and have done. And in a virtual context, it's also a nice way showing the empty board and then showing the full board with all the post-its and comments and group works and so on. So giving participants that feeling of accomplishment. But my last question, I want to dive into one step further. After the training, what suggestions would you have that we create that positive emotion after the training is over? So is there any activity or one last thought that you'd like to share?
A couple things, actually. I have a suite of things in hand. I want to mention that not just showing them the boards at the end, but if they can collectively create a takeaway that they go away with that summarizes that knowledge and is a useful tool, might be an interesting idea. I'm working on something like that for the LDA going forward. But afterwards, one of the things, I loved what one person said, Celine Schillinger, who has a new book out on leadership, but she said they never released a course until the manager and supervisor training was also produced. So one of the things that can happen is you go through training and you go back to the workplace and the supervisor, forget all that stuff you learned, we do it this way here. You can extinguish learning really quickly that way. So making sure that the environment is supportive of your ongoing development, maybe even arrange for coaching that at various times you're observed and given positive feedback. Constructive criticism, you've made it safe, will be okay. So, you're really doing this well. They talk about the sandwich. Praise something, give some constructive criticism, come back to the praise. Not a bad suggestion, as long as it's specific to their performance. Connect them to community. Become part of the practitioners, and together you continue to develop each other. So create a community practice around this outcome. And just reactivation. So even if they're not seeing it through their coach or supervisor, send them out little motivational bits, new models, new examples and stories. Give them some tests. This is something that doesn't happen frequently in real life, and yet you need to keep it active. It happens, it's important. Give them little practice opportunities, mini scenarios. And one of the activities I've seen done well is in the learning experience, you have them write a letter to themselves that they then, or you as the instructor facilitator can do this, but they receive sometime later some reactivation that's a note they wrote to themselves, or you've written something, just letting them know that you're still thinking about them and caring about their success. Self-determination theory of DC and Ryan talks about among mastery, autonomy, and relatedness. And that relatedness is other people caring. That community helps build that. The facilitator still checking in with them builds that. Coaching and supervisors builds that. Lets them know that that this is not a lone endeavor. They're not alone in this. Other people care about it too.
And I love that what you were saying. So this letter to yourself is something that we used to do a lot in presence trainings, and somehow it got lost to space. But I'm not sure if you know, but I found a platform. It's called futureme.org, where you can write and program an email to yourself with a certain topic, content, and for a certain date and time. And I've been using that now for some time with my participants in two ways, and I love it. On one hand, I ask them to put a key learning plus an action step into that email and make it sort of a reminder to themselves in a week, whether they did it or not somehow. And the second one, I used it the other last week with another group about where they were giving themselves positive feedback on a topic from that course, and it was delivered a week later. So also through that feedback, I tried to create that positive emotion loop coming up again a week later. And it worked really lovely. Usually participants love that, because even if you use your own email tool and you schedule an email for the week after, you see it in your draft emails, right? But sometimes if you have it in this Future Me platform, it's just out there, you forget about that, and then suddenly there is a nice email in your email inbox folder with a feedback from somebody else or a reminder to yourself, which is really lovely.
And I have a fourth role where I'm on an advisory board for a startup that hasn't gone public yet, but it's about reactivating the ability for coaches to create prompts. Because if you're only seeing people once every week or 2 weeks or once every month, that's not enough time for reactivation. And we know that learning atrophies really quickly without reactivation. It actually should be a couple days apart or several days. And so what can we do? Well, they're building a platform that supports that. Stay tuned.
And also, this is probably a reminder to the LD Accelerator that on a regular basis, you're connecting with folks from L&D, from the L&D field, and you exchange on important topics. Clark, I'm saying a big thank you for being again here with me on the Virtual Space Hero stage. Clark, I have a virtual cocktail prepared for you backstage, and I'm joining you there in a bit. Give me a second.
No worries. Thank you all, and I hope good luck to you all.
It was fantastic. A great conversation with a lot of content for my next workshops. And I hope there was also a lot out for you there. Thanks again for providing us with your questions also beforehand. And well, with that, I'm going to close down today. And I hope you already follow Quinn, the LD Accelerator. And of course, also head over to our webpage, virtualspacehero.com, if you want to provide us with a suggestion of a speaker, of a guest, or maybe also with a topic that you would like us to pick up upon. If you go to the webpage, you can find already the lineup until June is ready there. And with that, I'm going to leave you, and I'm wishing you a wonderful morning, afternoon, or good night. Become a virtual space hero.